jumping right in. We're looking at Phoronix today. Some juicy details about AMD's upcoming graphics driver support
Oh, yeah.
in Linux 6.15.
Nice.
You sent over Michael Larabell's latest article, and
Yeah.
honestly, some of this stuff has
Yeah.
me scratching my head, but that's what our deep dive is for, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Larabell
Yeah.
always gets into the nitty-gritty, which is great, for us.
Oh, yeah.
Nerds.
For sure. For sure. So new AMD GPUs and APUs getting support.
Right.
That's kind of expected, right?
Yeah. That's.
But then there's this mention of RDNA 3.5.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta admit, my ears perked up at that. What do we think? A performance bump, a whole new architecture.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because AMD hasn't officially announced anything about RDNA 3.5 yet. Seeing it pop up in the Linux driver code this early suggests they're serious about
Oh, yeah.
getting ahead of the game.
Yeah.
Now, whether it's a significant architectural leap or more of a refinement, that's the million-dollar question.
Okay, detective hats on then.
Right.
The article mentions new IP blocks, too. I'm assuming these are like pieces of the GPU itself.
Right. Think of it like this. You've got your graphics core, you got your display engine, you got your memory controller, all these different components working together.
Right.
Each one is an IP block,
Okay.
and they all get updated at different rates.
Gotcha. And it's the specific versions of these blocks that give us clues about what AMD is cooking up, right?
Exactly.
So we've got GC 11.5.2 and 11.5.3, which could be tied to RDNA 3.5.
Right.
Then there's SDMA 6.1.3
Yep.
and DCN 3.6.0. What's jumping out at you from those numbers?
The GC versions definitely support the RDNA 3.5 theory,
Right.
but that SDMA version 6.1.3,
Yeah.
that's where things get really interesting. SDMA, or System Direct Memory Access, is all about how the GPU interacts with the system's memory.
Okay.
This new version might be hinting at better integration with AMD's Infinity Fabric, potentially a big boost for multi-GPU setups.
Whoa.
And that's something we haven't seen from Intel or NVIDIA on the Linux side yet.
So a potential advantage for AMD in the multi-GPU arena.
Yeah.
That's huge, especially for professionals working with massive data sets or complex simulations.
Yeah.
All right, on to the display engine, then DCN 3.6.0.
Okay.
New display features, maybe?
Possibly. We could be looking at support for higher resolution, faster refresh rates, even new HDR standards.
Right.
It's hard to say for sure until we see more technical documentation, but AMD has been pushing the envelope on display tech lately.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's not just about the raw specs, right?
No.
The Linux display system, DRM, gets a mention too. There's this broadcast RGB DRM property.
Right.
Color accuracy junkies rejoice.
This is a subtle but important one, especially for content creators. Broadcast RGB is a color format that can be a bit tricky to handle accurately.
Okay.
This new property in DRM suggests AMD is putting a lot of effort into getting color reproduction spot on, even for niche workflows. Think high-end video editing,
Oh, wow.
color grading, that sort of thing.
So AMD is aiming for a double whammy better hardware and a software environment that squeezes every drop of performance and accuracy out of it.
Exactly.
Not bad.
Not bad at all. And it plays into AMD's strategy of targeting both gamers and professionals
Oh, yeah.
with their Linux drivers.
Uh-huh.
They're trying to build an ecosystem that can compete with Windows on every level.
Okay, competition is good, right?
Absolutely.
Keeps everyone innovating. Now, there's one feature mentioned that I think a lot of users will appreciate: dynamic workload profile switching for all RDNA GPUs. This sounds like some next-level power management.
It is.
Either.
Imagine your GPU being able to shift gears depending on what you're doing.
Oh,
Game boon full performance mode.
okay.
Just browsing the web.
Yeah,
It dials things back to save power.
interesting.
And it's all done automatically at the driver level.
That's pretty slick.
Wow.
And how does this compare to what NVIDIA is doing with their drivers? Any downsides we should be aware of?
That's a great question. NVIDIA's had similar features for a while now, but their implementation is more focused on power saving. AMD's approach seems to be geared towards optimizing performance
Right.
across a wider range of scenarios.
Yeah.
As for downsides, the main concern would be latency.
Okay.
If the profile switching isn't seamless, you might notice lag or stutters when the GPU changes gears.
Ah, I see.
We'll have to wait for benchmarks to see how it performs in real-world use.
Good point. Benchmarks will tell the real story. Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about some of the more technical aspects of this driver update. I'm seeing OEM I2C support mentioned. What does that even mean?
This one is all about customization. I2C is a communication protocol used for controlling various components on a graphics card.
Okay.
OEM I2C support Basically means giving more control to the manufacturers who build cards based on AMD's GPUs.
Right.
Companies like Asus, Sapphire, XFX, you name it.
So think RGB lighting control,
Yeah.
fan curves, potentially even overclocking profiles specific to a particular card model.
Exactly.
It's about letting users tweak things to their liking.
It's a nod towards the enthusiast community.
For sure.
The folks who really like to tinker with their hardware and squeeze out every last bit of performance.
Oh yeah, I can already see the forum threads lighting up with custom fan curves and RGB patterns. Okay, but enough about the bling. Let's get back to the core functionality.
Right.
There's a mention of JPEG-Q reset support. Now, I'm no graphics expert,
Right.
but that sounds pretty specific.
It is. And it might sound like a minor detail, but it can be a big deal for stability.
Okay.
The JPEG engine is used for decoding and encoding JPEG images, which is a pretty common task, especially if you're editing photos or videos.
Right.
Right.
Okay, so what happens if the JPEG engine crashes or gets stuck?
Yeah.
Blue screen of death.
Potentially.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least a system freeze or application crash.
Huh?
This new feature basically allows the driver to reset the JPEG engine gracefully.
Oh.
If it encounters a problem, preventing those hard crashes and keeping your system running smoothly, it's all about robustness.
Okay, so it's like a safety net
Hmm.
for those who work with a lot of JPEG-heavy content. Precisely. And it highlights the fact that these driver updates aren't just about adding shiny new features.
Yeah.
They're also about making the overall Linux graphics experience more stable and reliable.
Solid foundation, then add the bells and whistles on top.
Yeah,
Makes sense. All right, we've covered a lot of ground this first part of our deep dive,
we have.
but there's still more to explore. Let's take a quick break and then come back to tackle the remaining details.
Sounds good to me. We've got some fascinating technical bits to unpack, and I think you'll find them quite insightful.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, we're back. More technical goodies to dissect from these AMD driver updates. One that caught my eye was RORAS CPR support. Rose CPR. It sounds like alphabet soup, but I'm guessing it's something important.
Definitely important. Especially for anyone running mission-critical systems, RAS stands for reliability, availability, and serviceability, and CPER is Common Platform Error Record. Essentially, it's a system for detecting and logging hardware errors in a standardized way. So if there's a problem with the GPU, the system flags it and keeps a detailed record.
Exactly. Think of it like a black box for your graphics card. If something goes wrong, you've got a log file that can help diagnose the issue. This is crucial for servers and workstations where downtime can be incredibly costly.
Okay, so it's all about preventing those, oh no, everything's broken moments. Makes sense. What else is on the menu of technical improvements?
There are a few fixes mentioned that deal with HDR content, specifically the BT 2020 color space. It's a wider color gamut used in HDR video, and apparently there were some issues with how it was handled in the previous driver. These fixes should result in more accurate color reproduction for HDR content, so your movies and games will look even more stunning.
More vibrant colors, better contrast. Sounds like a win for HDR fans. But I'm curious, how do these HDR improvements on Linux compare to what we see on Windows? Is AMD catching up, or are they still playing catch-up?
That's a good question. Historically, Windows has had a bit of an edge when it comes to HDR support, mainly because of tighter integration with the hardware and software ecosystem. But Linux is making strides, and these driver updates are a sign that AMD is serious about closing that gap. We'll need to see some head-to-head comparisons to know for sure, but it's definitely a step in the right direction.
All right, let's hope those comparisons come out soon. HDR gaming on Linux is something I'm definitely looking forward to. Speaking of gaming, the article also mentions SRIOV fixes. Now, SRIOV, that rings a bell, but I can't quite place it. Refresh my memory.
SRIOV stands for Single Root I/O Virtualization. It's a technology that allows multiple virtual machines to share a single physical GPU. This is a big deal for cloud gaming, virtual desktops, and other scenarios where you want to make the most of your GPU resources.
Right. So instead of each virtual machine needing its own dedicated GPU, they can all tap into the power of a single high-performance card.
Exactly. And the fixes mentioned here likely address bugs or compatibility issues related to SRIOV, making sure that virtual machines can utilize the GPU's capabilities smoothly and efficiently. It's all about making virtualization more seamless and performant.
And this ties back into AMD's strategy of targeting both gamers and professionals with their Linux drivers. They're thinking about the whole ecosystem from individual users to large-scale data centers. It's a pretty comprehensive approach. But let's zoom out for a second and think about what this all means for the average Linux user who just wants to play games or watch movies. Are these updates a big deal for them, or is it mostly under the hood stuff?
It's both, actually. On the surface, you might not notice a huge difference, but all these under-the-hood improvements add up to a smoother, more stable, and more reliable experience. Games will run better, videos will look better, and you'll spend less time troubleshooting issues. It's like having a well-tuned engine. You might not see it, but you can definitely feel the difference.
Right. It's about that overall polish and refinement that makes Linux such a joy to use. Okay, one last technical tidbit that I want to touch on. DisplayCore next. DCN, engine fixes for Renoir. Renoir, that's an older APU architecture, right?
Yes, Renoir is based on AMD's Zen 2 CPU architecture and RDNA 2 graphics architecture. It was released back in 2020.
So why are they still fixing things for an older architecture? Is this typical?
It is, actually. AMD has a reputation for providing long-term support for their hardware, even older models. These DCN engine fixes likely address bugs or performance issues that have been reported by users. It's about ensuring that everyone, even those with older hardware, has a good experience on Linux.
That's great. Shows commitment.
Yeah.
All right, I think we've covered all the major technical points, but what I really want to dig into now is the bigger picture. What does this continuous development of open source drivers, particularly from AMD, mean for the future of Linux as a gaming platform?
That's where things get really interesting. We're seeing a convergence of factors that could make Linux a serious contender in the gaming world. AMD's commitment to open source drivers is a huge part of that.
You're saying open source is the key. How so?
Well, think about it. Open source drivers mean that anyone can contribute to their development, which leads to faster innovation and better optimization. It also means that the drivers are more transparent, so users can see exactly what's going on under the hood and even contribute fixes or improvements themselves.
So it's a community effort, not just a single company dictating how things work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that community aspect is another major advantage for Linux. There's a passionate community of developers and gamers who are constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Linux gaming. New tools, new technologies, new games, it's all happening at a rapid pace.
All right, I'm starting to get excited. But let's be realistic. Windows still dominates the gaming market. What
Right.
needs to happen for Linux to truly break through?
That's the million-dollar question. I think it's a combination of factors. We need more AAA game developers to port their games to Linux. We need anti-cheat software that works reliably on Linux. And we need to keep pushing the performance and features of open source drivers.
So better games, better compatibility, better performance. Sounds like a recipe for success.
It is, and I think we're getting closer to that point every day.
Hmm.
The progress we've seen in the past few years has been incredible. Who knows, maybe in a few years we'll be talking about Linux as the dominant gaming platform.
That would be quite the turnaround. Okay, before we get too carried away with our Linux gaming fantasies, let's bring things back down to earth. We've talked a lot about gaming, but these driver updates also benefit a wider audience, right?
Absolutely. Content creators, video editors, scientists, anyone who relies on powerful GPUs to get their work done will see benefits from these updates. Better stability, better performance, better compatibility. It all adds up to a more productive and enjoyable experience.
It's like AMD is saying, hey, Linux users, we see you, we hear you, and we're building these drivers for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're recognizing that Linux is a serious platform for both work and play, and they're putting their resources behind it.
That's great to see. All right, I think we've squeezed every last drop of insight out of these driver updates. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I wanted to ask you for a final thought, something for our listener to ponder. We've talked about the technical details, the performance gains, the future of Linux gaming. But what about the even bigger picture? What does this ongoing evolution of open source drivers tell us about the direction of technology as a whole?
That's a deep question, and one that deserves some careful consideration. But here's my take. The open source movement, particularly in the realm of software development, represents a fundamental shift in how we create and share technology. It's about collaboration, transparency, and community-driven innovation. And as open source software continues to mature and gain wider adoption, I think we'll see a ripple effect across the entire tech landscape.
So you're saying this could be a catalyst for a more open and collaborative approach to technology in general?
Exactly. Imagine a world where the best minds in the industry, regardless of their affiliation, can work together to build the best possible software, free from the constraints of proprietary licenses and closed ecosystems.
Yeah.
That's the promise of open source, and it's a future worth striving for.
Wow. Okay. I'm officially inspired. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the nitty-gritty technical details to the broader implications of open source software. It's been quite a journey.
It has indeed. And I'm grateful to have had this conversation with you. It's always a pleasure to explore these topics and see where they lead us.
Me too. And a huge thank you to our listener for joining us on this adventure. We hope you've learned something new and maybe even feel a little bit inspired to explore the world of open source technology yourself. Until next time, keep on learning, keep on exploring, and keep on diving deep.
Yeah, it really is fascinating to think about open source,
Yeah.
challenging the status quo,
Mm-hmm.
driving innovation in unexpected ways. And AMD is right there, on the front lines.
Yeah, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with open source graphics drivers.
It's a smart move on their part. By embracing open source, they're not just appealing to Linux users,
Right.
but also tapping into a global network of talented developers.
Yeah.
It's a win-win situation.
Absolutely. And for Linux users, it means having access to drivers that are constantly evolving and improving. No more waiting for proprietary blobs.
Right.
No more closed source mysteries.
Exactly. And that transparency fosters trust and collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
When users can see how the software works, they're more likely to report bugs, suggest improvements, and even contribute code themselves.
Yeah.
It creates a virtuous cycle of innovation.
So it's not just about AMD releasing drivers, it's about building a community
Right.
around those drivers, a community that's invested in making Linux the best platform it can be.
Precisely. And that community is what makes Linux so special.
Yeah.
It's a global network of passionate individuals
Mm.
who are driven by a shared belief in the power of open source software.
It's a powerful thing, isn't it? And it's not just limited to the tech world. We're seeing open source principles applied to everything from education to healthcare to government. It's a movement that has the potential to reshape society as we know it.
I completely agree. Open source is about more than just code. It's about a philosophy of openness, transparency, and collaboration. It's about empowering individuals and communities to create and share knowledge freely.
And that's a pretty inspiring message, don't you think? That especially in a world that often feels dominated by corporate interests and closed systems.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Open source offers an alternative, a path towards a more equitable and accessible future where technology serves humanity, not the other way around.
Okay, I'm officially fired up. I think we've stumbled onto something bigger than just a deep dive into graphics drivers. This is about a fundamental shift in how we think about technology and its role in society.
It is. And it's a conversation that's just beginning.
Yeah.
As open source continues to gain momentum, I think we'll see more and more people asking these fundamental questions about how we build and share technology.
And that's a good thing, right? The more we question, the more we explore, the more likely we are to find solutions that benefit everyone.
Exactly. It's all about fostering a culture of curiosity, critical thinking, and collaboration. That's how we create a future where technology is a force for good.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the technical intricacies of graphics drivers to the broader implications of open source for society as a whole. It's been quite a journey.
It has indeed. And I'm grateful to have had this conversation with you. It's always a pleasure to explore these topics and see where they lead us.
Me too. And a huge thank you to our listener for joining us on this adventure. We hope you found it insightful, engaging, and maybe even a little bit inspiring. Remember, the world of technology is constantly evolving, and there's always something new to learn. So stay curious, keep exploring, and who knows, maybe you'll be the one driving the next wave of open source innovation. Until next time, keep on diving deep.